First, live, local. This is Fox 12 Now.
That is a great shot of Mount Hood out there. Hello, everyone. This is Fox 12 Now. I'm Greg Nibbler. Thanks for joining us. Just pressing some buttons back there. That's my digital desk set up, so you'll see me doing that a lot if you watch this show. And I appreciate everybody who's joining us today because I am actually really excited about what we're going to be talking about. It says it right there, Audible Bat Project. That is what we're going to be discussing. I'm talking about going out and listening for bats. Why would you do that? How do you do that? We're going to find out all of that information today because we are joined right now by Sarah Rose from the Audible Bat Project. Sarah, thank you very much for joining us. You know, I heard about this through a friend who recommended that I reach out and talk to you all about this, and I absolutely sent an email. You were gracious enough to want to come on here and talk about it. But to start off, I think the question that everybody has is, what is the Audible Bat Project?
Yeah, so the Audible Bats Project is what I'm calling a multi-method monitoring project for bats in the Pacific Northwest. So there's a citizen science component, and that's what I'm going to focus on with you all today. So essentially, Oregon is home to 15 species of bats, and the primary way that we monitor where they are and when is through recording their echolocation calls. But we have two species of bats for whom the calls they produce are actually audible to the human ear, which is super fun. One of them, we actually, because they're so odd and they echolocate at such a strange frequency, it's actually easier for humans to hear them than it is for our specialized technology to hear them. So this started out as a really small project, just looking for spotted bats in Central Oregon. And now it's actually a tri-state project in Oregon, Idaho, and Washington, looking for spotted bats and pallid bats.
And what's unique about those two kinds of bats?
Yeah, so most bats echolocate at a frequency above 30 kilohertz. So this is above the range of human hearing. It's a very high frequency sound. Spotted bats actually echolocate at around 10 kilohertz. So that's within the range of hearing for most humans. And so that's what's kind of unique about them. They're also very solitary. People actually didn't know that we had spotted bats in Oregon for decades.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was in the early 2000s that we really got confirmation that there was a strong population here in Oregon because it was just so hard for researchers to find them. So we're trying to use this project to find out how often we're missing them with our fancy equipment, and that's where the help of the public comes in. And then our second species, the pallid bat, these guys are extra super weird as far as bats go. So most of our bats in the Pacific Northwest feed on flying insects, or at the very least on insects that live in trees. Pallid bats prefer to eat terrestrial arthropods, so like spiders, scorpions, Jerusalem crickets, those sorts of things.
Weird.
So they'll actually land on the ground to grab their prey and then take off with it and eat it elsewhere. And so when they're hunting, they're actually not even using echolocation very often, and instead they're flying silently and listening for the sounds of their prey skittering across the ground. And another interesting thing, and what kind of pertains to this project about pallid bats, is that the mothers gather in the spring to birth and raise their pups together. These are called maternity colonies, and at these colonies, the pallid bats produce social calls. So they talk to each other, and they do this at a frequency that, again, is within the range of human hearing. So if you find a pallid bat maternity colony, you can hear all the moms and babies talking to one another. So we're hoping to use this project to locate more pallid bat maternity colonies in the Pacific Northwest.
That is crazy. Where are those ones at? Because I don't think I've ever seen a bat land on the ground and grab something like that.
Yeah, so they're largely considered a desert specialist species. So they're going to be in the eastern 2/3 of Oregon, but they will also go up into like the Willamette Valley. They really like agricultural lands, and they're like a sandy blonde color, so they're not super noticeable on the ground. I've never actually seen one land on the ground. I've seen them flying around, but they're pretty hard to spot, especially since they're doing this at night.
Well, you mentioned, that these are the two that you can actually hear with the human ear. I think that's hilarious that the specialized equipment, fancy equipment, can't pick it up as well. So obviously that's part of the reason why the project is there. But tell us about that and how people get involved and how it all works.
Yeah, so the premise is pretty simple. The task for volunteers is to go out to a site, usually on or near a cliff or a rocky ridge, and sit quietly after sunset and listen for bats. I have an app that they can use to record every time they hear a bat. They just tick it off. I heard this species at this time. This year, we'll actually be doing group outings. So if people want to get involved, they can visit osukascades.edu/audiblebats, and that will direct them to a form where they can sign up to be a volunteer, and they can join me for one of 3 group survey outings where we'll be listening for bats and camping out. And these are taking place at Lake Billy Chinook, out in the Ochoco Forest, and up near Maupin. But then people can also volunteer individually. And again, they're just going to fill out that form, and then I'll assign them a survey site, and they can take off on their own to go listen for bats.
That's actually really cool. So you're getting to go camp in some really amazing areas. And you're, listening for bats. A couple of questions. One, how did you get involved in bats? What was it that drew you to this field?
Yeah, so I have been a fan of small, furry, feisty animals since I was very small, since I was a small, feisty animal myself. And so bats were kind of a natural draw for me. But I got involved in this field specifically. I went to OSU Cascades. I got a degree in natural resources there. And one of my professors, as I was graduating, mentioned a job with the Northwest Bat Hub. And I applied, I got it, and I've been here ever since. So it's been 5 years. I started out as a field technician. I'm now the assistant coordinator and project lead for this project. But I've played almost every role here at the Bat Hub over the last 5 years. And it's one of those species that once you start working with them, it's really hard to transition to anything else. They're just so interesting and weird, and there's a lot of them, and they need our help. And so, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done with bats.
Well, you mentioned that them needing our help. Can you talk about that a little bit more and why this is important?
Yeah, absolutely. So bats face a lot of threats. Some people will have heard about this, but back in around 2006, a new fungal disease was discovered in our bat populations in the eastern U.S. It's called white nose syndrome, and it spread really rapidly across the eastern U.S., the Midwest. And it has killed off millions of bats in the last 2 decades, and it is slowly making its way into our Western populations. So that's a big concern. There's a lot of outreach and research being done in regards to white nose syndrome. It's the reason that a lot of our caves here in Central Oregon are either closed off or you have to go through a decontamination process to go in and out, like Lava River Cave. So that's one of the big threats to the overall populations. Here in the Western U.S., we're also deeply concerned about wind turbines, bats, especially migrating bats. Hundreds of thousands of them are killed annually by wind turbines.
Wow.
So that's a big issue. Yeah, it's very serious. And again, there's a lot of research being done for this, but it doesn't, the efforts that have been taken so far don't seem to have been enough. So there's more effort going into the conservation on that front. Pesticide use is also a big issue, especially for bats like my spotteds and pallids that like to feed on things that feed on crops. If those insects are eating pesticides and then my bats come along and eat the insects, something called biomagnification happens. As you move up the food chain, those pesticides become more concentrated and can be fatal for predator species like bats. And then, as with pretty much every species on Earth, we're worried about habitat loss. Less of a concern with like my spotted bats that like to roost in cliffs. There's not a lot of bad things that can happen to cliffs. They're not a good place for human development. But as we lose more of our dry forests and homes expand and there are fewer native plants around to attract native pollinators, food sources go down. So bats are getting hit from all sides, basically.
Yeah, that's a lot that you just covered right there, and I think the pollination side too. I think that's something that I'm gonna guess a lot of people don't realize how important they are for that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's, it's difficult when there's a step of separation between like, our bats don't necessarily pollinate our flowers here in Oregon, but there is still a connection between who's pollinating what and how healthy our bat population is. And so I do like to tell everyone that if you want to help bats out, bat boxes are fine, they're great, but really planting pollinator gardens is one of the biggest things that you can do to help your local species, and not just bats, but just about everything will be happier if there are more native pollinators around.
And how important are they, like their role in the ecosystem?
Incredibly important. So bats here in the Pacific Northwest are all insectivorous. So they're eating bugs, and a lot of them really like to eat mosquitoes. So that's what we call an ecological service. They are doing us a favor. They are helping to keep our forests in balance. They're helping to protect our agricultural lands. They don't really serve as a prey species so much, except for a few raptors, but like all of our native wildlife, they are deeply intertwined with all of the other species in their habitat. So they're incredibly important.
So let's talk about what it's like to go out and go do this. You mentioned you'll provide an app, or we can go, you can go with you on the camping trip, but what's the actual process like? Because I would assume it's like at dusk is probably the best time, but honestly, I don't even know if that's true. Is that the actual, is that true? Or am I making that up?
Yeah. So it's a little after dusk. So we use a start time that corresponds with the end of what's called civil twilight. So there are these different measurements of the amount of sunlight on the landscape based on your latitude and longitude. And so we have our survey start at the end of civil twilight. So when it's just starting to get really dark. So what this looks like is you drive out to your site. It's going to be at a dry canyon, the top of a cliff, the bottom of a cliff, sometimes like a big pond or something like that. You'll get out there just before sunset so that you're navigating to your site in the daylight. You'll sit, you'll take down some habitat data. So what kind of habitat you're in? Are you in the sage steppe? Are you in a dry ponderosa forest? You'll put down your survey start time. And then you're just literally going to sit quietly, and every so often, hopefully, you'll hear this faint ticking noise as a spotted or a pallid bat flies past. They do sound different. So spotted bats make kind of a singular tick, 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 whereas pallid bats go tick, 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 tick. Yeah, and it's a pretty magical experience. If they come out right before it gets completely dark, you can usually kind of locate them with your eye after you hear them and watch them fly overhead, which is incredibly fun. But it's exciting just to hear them. And yeah, you sit out for about an hour and listen, and then you strap on your headlamp and head back to your car or your camp or what have you.
I know we've got a video, and it may be too low to hear it, but I'm going to try to pull it up, because you have one here of that you sent in of some bats flying around. Actually, I'll be quiet and see if anybody can hear it. It's really faint on this recording, so I can see that. But what are we looking at right here?
Yeah, so in this video, you can see one spotted bat flying along the top of those rocks there. So he's kind of navigating along that rocky ridge. And that's really typical spotted bat behavior. So they like to they fly high and they stay near the tops of ridges and rocky outcrops like that. And he's probably, or she, is probably hunting, looking for large moths as it flies past.
So, so once you get this information, you record these, what do you do with the Audible data that you get?
Yeah, so I will be incorporating that with our data that we collect with our fancy equipment. And I'm hoping to develop a statistical model to better predict where spotted bats live on the landscape, to get a better idea of what habitat features they truly need. There's some conflicting data in the literature. They're described as a desert species, but they can be found in alpine meadows. They might go up to 3,000 meters. They might only, go up the mountains to like 2,000 meters. No one's really sure. So we're going to try to refine the range map for the spotted bats with this data. And then for the pallid bats, we're keeping it much simpler, and we're just trying to find those maternity colonies and see what habitat features they share so that we can go out looking for more of them. Both of these species are Oregon Conservation Strategy species, so they're considered particularly important in the state of Oregon to protect. And so if we know where they are, we can better conserve the lands that they inhabit.
Well, I think this is really cool too, because it sounds like, in addition to the events that they can go to with you, but if you want to do this, if you're going out camping, this could be an activity that you do when you're already going to be out there, add this onto it and record some data.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool. Well, Sarah, remind everybody again of how they can get involved and how they can find out more about what you're doing.
Absolutely. So the website is osucascades.edu/audiblebats. But it's also a very Googleable project. So if you just Google the Audible Bats Project, it will come up. There's a form on our website that will direct you to sign up to become a volunteer. You don't have to commit right away. It's more of like a form saying that you're interested. And then I'll be reaching out with further details as the project progresses.
Real quick, what is that in the background right there?
Oh, I just wanted a nice picture of some bats exiting a colony at sunset. So I believe these are Brazilian free-tailed bats exiting a cave in Texas, but I could be wrong about that. I just pulled it up real quick so I would have a nice background.
Either way, it looks cool. Well, Sarah, thank you very much for joining us and talking about this. This is really, really interesting what you're doing. And I think it's probably a great thing for a lot of people to get involved with too. It sounds like it can help out, and it's not too complicated to do it, and especially if you're going to be out already. So very, very cool. Sarah, thanks so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
All right, that is fascinating. So really appreciate Sarah joining us here for Fox 12 Now. I'm Greg Nibbler, and again, thanks everybody for joining us. We are at the digital desk. Sarah can still see herself right there. It's no secret that that's where it's at. But yeah, anyway, this is our show that we do. We stream this show. You can find us on all of our apps. If you found us right now, congrats. Remember where that is. We're on YouTube, and we've got lots of great interviews and things that we do that we get to talk about. Sometimes it's deeper dive on stories with reporters. Sometimes it's learning about interesting projects. Sometimes it's interviews with celebrities or luminaries or whoever. So all kinds of stuff, and we appreciate you joining us. So thanks for watching, and we'll be back soon with more.